Hey guys, welcome back. Happy Halloween. I think when this video is going to drop, it's going to be Friday the 31st. I am most likely in a tree right now, and with good reason. This is the time of the season that we hunters dream about all year round, the start of the rut. And so in today's video, I want to talk to you guys about a few tips and strategies for hunting the whitetail rut. Just like with the pre-rut, the rut is going to start around the same time every single year in the area that you hunt. Here in mid-Michigan, that's right now. Sometime around Halloween, November 1st, that's when the rut is starting on our properties. If your property is a little bit further north, it might have started a little sooner. If your property is a little bit further south, it might start a few days later. But regardless of where your property is located, it should be starting around the same time every single year. And the reason that us hunters cannot wait to hunt the rut, the big chase, is because this is the time of the season where anything can happen. You never know what could walk by your stand. And that's because the rut is the whitetail's breeding season. So those bucks that you've been chasing around the neighborhood during the early season and during the pre-rut, they are now going to be focusing on pretty much one thing for the next couple weeks, and that's breeding as many does as possible. So survival, which sometimes during the rut they throw that one out the window, and breeding does. And that can make buck movement a little bit more random during the rut. Up until this point in the season, deer movement, buck movement has been a little bit more predictable. In the early part of the season, those bucks, they're on that bed to feed pattern, and we're generally trying to target those bucks as they're getting up out of those bedding areas in the early evening and heading towards those food sources. During the pre-rut, they become a little bit more active during the daylight hours, and they start hitting scrapes more often and cruising doe hotspots. But during the rut, a lot of that predictability, a lot of that consistency is somewhat out the window because, again, these bucks are really only focused on one thing. They're focused on breeding as many does as they can. But even though sometimes it feels like the only consistent part about the rut is the inconsistency, hopefully after this video and the tips we talk about, we'll be able to find some predictability in the local buck movement to hopefully give you guys some opportunities at those local bucks. The first thing I want to touch on for hunting the rut are our preferred stand locations. And these honestly don't differ much from our stand locations that we like to hunt during the pre-rut. In the morning, we really like to be on the downwind side of those known doe bedding areas. So as those bucks are up walking around during the morning looking for that next receptive doe, they're going to be cruising the downwind side of these known doe bedding areas. For the afternoon hunt, just like with the pre-rut, and honestly just like with the early season as well, we like to be downwind of the trail that leads from the bedding areas to the afternoon food source. Or if you have a staging food plot or a kill plot, a micro plot on your property that the deer like to hit before they reach that destination food source, we like to hunt over this as well. And again, that's because during the rut, these bucks are really only focused on one thing, and that's breeding as many does as possible. And in the afternoon, these does are getting up out of those bedding areas and heading off to that afternoon food source. So if there's a buck in your neighborhood that's looking for that next receptive doe to breed, he is going to be looking in and around those food sources. If possible, you really want to try to find stand locations that are located on pinch points or within bottlenecks or funnels. These are areas that consolidate deer movement. Deer movement that would otherwise be spread out over hundreds of yards is oftentimes pinched down or constricted in these bottlenecks, funnels, or pinch points. And we just did a video on pinch points in hill country or areas with more elevation change. And I'm going to put out another video very soon on pinch points on flatland for those of you guys that do not hunt areas with a lot of elevation change. And the reason that hunting these bottlenecks and funnels or pinch points is so important during the rut is because these bucks are going to be traveling a lot. They're going to be going from bedding area to bedding area to food source to food source. We don't always know where that buck is or where he's going. Again, because the rut can be pretty chaotic, it can almost feel random with what's going on. But one thing we know for certain that those bucks are going to do is once they're done breeding the doe they're with, they're going to start looking for the next one. So if you're hunting during the morning and you find a pinch point that's located in between two known doe bedding areas, that's a great spot to set up on the downwind side. Or in the evening, if you know where there's a pretty solid bottleneck or funnel in between a known doe bedding area and a food source, that is a great place to set up in the afternoon. Because wherever that buck is in the neighborhood, when he starts looking for that next doe, you have a much better chance of him walking by your stand if you're hunting on some sort of a pinch point or bottleneck or funnel. The next thing I want to talk about when it comes to hunting the rut is when should you be hunting? Up until this point in the season, we've been basing a lot of our hunts on cold fronts. When the temperature drops, the wind speed drops, the barometric pressure rises, this is when we want to be in the woods because there's a greater chance that the deer are going to be moving. However, during the rut, I'm not saying that the cold fronts don't matter, they absolutely do, but we want to be in the woods whenever we have the chance. And again, this is because during the breeding season, we never know what's going to walk by our stand. It doesn't matter if it's 20 degrees or 80 degrees. Bucks are going to breed does during the rut regardless of the temperature. So even if it happens to be a little bit warmer in your area this year, the last couple years we've had really warm days during the rut. If you have a free day, try to be in the woods, because during the rut, if that buck does not have a doe, there's a good chance he's going to be up on his feet looking for the next one. That being said, we do try to be in the woods as much as we can during the rut. We are saving our better stand locations for those post cold front days. So for example, if we have a really good stand location that's on a pinch point, downwind of doe bedding or in between two doe bedding areas, we're most likely going to save that stand location for a cooler day, a day that's more comfortable for cruising post cold front. However, if it's a 70-degree day, we are still going to be in the woods. We're just going to be sitting those lower probability stands that are located closer to a road, maybe closer to our cabin, but they're located on heavy travel routes. Because again, anything can happen during the rut. Those bucks are going to be cruising a lot looking for does, so you want to put in as much stand time as possible. Save your better stand locations for those higher probability days, those post cold front hunts. But if you have free time, this is the time of year to be in the woods as much as you can. And that brings us right to the next tip or next strategy for hunting the rut. Like I said, we want to be in the woods as much as we can. So this is the time of year where we start to do a lot more all-day sits. And an all-day sit is exactly what it sounds like. You are sitting in the woods all day, from first light to last light. And that can be fairly challenging. So there are a few tips I have for you guys to help you make it through your all-day sit. And we'll talk about two of those tips in this video. And the first tip I have for you guys to help you make it through your all-day sit revolves around staying comfortable in your stand location. And the first part about that is fairly obvious. You just want to make sure that you're in a comfortable stand or a comfortable blind. And if you're in a blind, a box blind, those are fairly comfortable. But if you're in a ladder stand or a hang-on tree stand, sometimes those can be uncomfortable, especially if you have a tree that's leaning, or maybe you have a tree that has a big knot in it. I've sat in a few of those. And if you're kind of off to the side a little bit like this, you might be able to sit in that for a little while. But if you're trying to make it through an all-day sit, that can be very challenging. So first, try to make sure that you have a comfortable stand location. Second, as it relates to being comfortable, make sure that you are dressed appropriately for the weather. A lot of the days that we're choosing to do all-day sits are those post-cold front days. The temperatures are much lower. These are the days that bucks are more comfortable cruising around. And on those colder days, you have to make sure that you're dressed appropriately, you're layered up, you've dressed for the conditions, because there is not much that's going to stop an all-day sit faster than getting cold. So again, make sure to layer up, bring your hand warmers, bring your toe warmers. And honestly, if it's a clear day, if you can just get to 11 or 12, with that sun hitting you, a lot of times that's enough to warm you up to get you through the rest of the day. And the last thing I want to touch on as it relates to comfort for your all-day sit is just to make sure that you bring enough to eat and enough to drink. During that all-day sit, you're going to get hungry, you're going to get thirsty, so just make sure that you're bringing a sandwich or your snack of choice, your drink of choice, because that's going to help you get through the day. And it's also going to give you kind of something to look forward to. And sometimes that's the hardest part of an all-day sit, is that mental aspect of it. Some of these sits, you'll go and you might not see anything for a long time. And if you have a snack, or if you have a sandwich, or maybe you're going to bust out the iced tea at a certain time, that gives you something to look forward to. And again, sometimes that's half the battle of that all-day sit, is just getting to that next hour. And so getting through that midday time frame, when sometimes it can feel like it can drag, but it can also be a really good time, because that's when that local giant just happens to walk by. Having those snacks, having those drinks, not only are these going to help with your hunger, help with your thirst, but they can also help give you something to do, give you something to look forward to during your all-day sit. The second tip I want to touch on when talking about all-day sits during the rut is, during an all-day sit, you're not always sitting in the same stand location. Like we talked about earlier, in the morning, we really want to be focused more on the downwind side of those doe bedding areas, where in the evening, a lot of times we're trying to focus more on that afternoon food source, that movement from bedding to food. Sometimes these can be the same stand location, but oftentimes we need to be moving stand locations midday, moving away from our morning stand location that's focused more around those bedding areas, and moving to the stand location that's focused more on the movement from the bedding to the food source. And this midday stand change, that can really help with your comfort as well. Just being able to stand up, stretch your legs, get that blood flowing a little bit, that can really help with your ability just to make it all day. The next thing I want to talk about when hunting the rut is calling. You know, your grunt call, a rattling sequence, and kind of my take on calling, at least in a high pressure state that I'm in here in Michigan. And me personally, I do not do much calling or much aggressive calling during the rut, and I'll explain why. The main reason that I don't do a lot of calling or I don't do a lot of aggressive calling is because I feel that in a high pressure state like Michigan, where you have a lot of hunters, a lot of pressured deer, a lot of the calling can do more harm than good. Or you could be spooking or educating more deer than you're actually bringing to your stand location. Deer have different personalities, just like we have different personalities. Your pets have different personalities. So there are going to be bucks out there that are more aggressive, you know, or bucks that are more curious. And there's also going to be bucks that are a little bit more cautious. They're a little bit more shy. And I think a lot of times those bucks that are getting brought into those calls, they're going to be the more aggressive buck. You know, they're looking for a fight, or maybe they're a curious buck. They're trying to figure out, you know, what's going on over there. And an overwhelming majority of the hunters here in Michigan are focused on shooting the first buck that they see. It doesn't matter if it's a 10-point or a 6-point, most hunters in Michigan are going to shoot the first buck that they see. And I'm not saying that that's wrong. I'm not saying that that's right. I'm just saying that's the reality where we hunt here in Michigan. And it's my opinion that a lot of these bucks that are coming into these calls, you know, the grunt call or the rattling sequence, these are the more aggressive bucks. These are the more curious bucks. And unfortunately, a lot of those bucks get shot, leaving more of the shy bucks, those cautious bucks that end up surviving, and they end up being your 3- and 4-year-old deer. And that tends to be what we're seeing when we do call. We're not bringing in those older age class deer, we're bringing in those very young, aggressive bucks. So again, me personally, in a high pressure state like Michigan, I don't do a whole lot of blind calling, again, because I think you could be doing more harm than good, and I think you could be educating or spooking a lot of the deer that you're after. That being said, I do have my grunt call on me every time I'm in the woods. And that's just in case I see a buck and I want to get a better look at him, or maybe he's walking in a different direction and it doesn't look like he's going to come my way. I might hit him with a contact grunt, just a short grunt just to get his attention. So he'll maybe pick his head up and you can kind of get a better look at him, maybe identify the deer. And sometimes he might change direction and head your way. Now, if that buck doesn't respond or doesn't seem interested in the contact grunts, I'm not going to push the limit. I'm going to put the call away. That deer, he might walk away now, but there's a decent chance that he's going to loop through in an hour or so. I picked that stand for a reason. It's in a good location. Trust your stand because, again, there's a decent chance that that buck could loop through in an hour or so. And the last tip I want to touch on for hunting the rut in this video before we run out of daylight is don't abandon scrapes. Now, bucks are not going to be hitting scrapes during the rut like they have been the last 10 days of October during the pre-rut, but during the rut, bucks will still check scrapes. Now again, they're not going to be actively working scrapes nearly as much as they were during the pre-rut, but remember, scrapes are one of the main ways the deer herd communicates with one another. And during the rut, when these bucks are cruising those doe hot spots, whether that's the food sources or those bedding areas, they're going to be checking those scrapes, but they're going to be doing it much quicker. Instead of actively working the scrape for a few minutes like they often do during the pre-rut, during the rut, they might just walk up to the licking branch, smell it for 2 seconds, and then continue on their way. But that 2 seconds might be all you need. And when it comes to scrapes, every year during the rut, I get pictures and videos of bucks that are either bedded down in the scrape or bedded down just next to the scrape. And I think they're doing this because they're waiting for the does to hit that scrape. They know the does are heading to that scrape, and so instead of cruising around looking for the does, they're just going to sit down at the scrape and wait for the does. But that's going to do it for today's video, guys, and a few tips for hunting during the rut. If you have any other rut hunting tips, please drop those in the comment section below. I'm sure everyone would love to hear those. The next couple weeks, guys, get out in the woods as much as you can. Good luck, have a happy Halloween, and we'll see you in the next video.